Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Emily Moyer. Dani Katz, my lovely co-host, is here. This is episode number 101 of Words, which means that it sounds like it should be educational or something, like a freshman English class or something like that. So we hope to learn you something a little bit new today. I know we rarely do this, but we're doing it today. We have a guest, and I'm very excited for this conversation. I've been observing our guest ever since I was introduced to her. If I get any of this wrong, please correct me. As part of Knitting Gate, where she was blacklisted from her knitting group for being Trump curious. And for some reason, that tickled the fancies of a lot of gatekeepers in the space between regular media and alternative media. And I was introduced to her through the portal of what I now consider to be a path to hell, the Rubin Report. And I'm embarrassed to say that I ever listened to it. But yeah, she made the round on the circuit for a period of time, and then she dabbled her toe in MAGA, dabbled her toe in libertarianism, decided none of these groups were really for her, and has been charting her own path through this territory, explaining to people what she learns along the way, enlightening to them to what people on both sides of the arguments get wrong about all of these groups, about the ideas like socialism, communism, Marxism, and whatnot. And sometimes I agree, sometimes I disagree. Her take is always entertaining and intriguing. And I know three things for sure. She gives no fucks what people think about her. She doesn't take any shit from anyone. And most importantly, she did not take the bait that invited you into the garden, that led you to the path, to the place that we're at now, which is the Faustian bargain, where we're going to be offered all of the things we want, so long as we're willing to sacrifice one part of free speech. And that's where we find ourselves today. That was our conversation on the last episode. So to expound on this and to regale us with all of the details of what led her through this sort of maze, Karlin Borisenko, welcome to Words. We're delighted to have you.
Hey, I mean, thank you so much for having me. And honestly, like that introduction was pretty great. And it's like, I don't actually find people that often who understand the entire arc of my story and understand that there are reasons that I've done things the way I've done them. And it's specifically because I got sucked into almost unwillingly with no prior knowledge of what any of this was. I got sucked into the conservative media apparatus in 2020. I got held up as like the Democrat who left the left, which my story was all true, but I was telling it because I thought it helped people. Conservative media was using me because they made me a political pawn to try to get more people from the left. I didn't realize what was going on, and very few people kind of had the perspective to know that like getting like it might seem like a blessing to be on all these shows and being propped up by PragerU and you know, at the time I was like, you know, oh, this is a great way to tell my story and to help more people. It is a Faustian bargain and it is not a blessing. And I have many regrets about 2020, but at the same time, it's also kind of led me to where I am today. And I don't think I would be where I am today without going through that experience. So I just appreciate you, you know, kind of understanding it from that perspective because most people don't.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, I was thinking about it today while I was working out. Like, you and I are pretty different in some of the topics that we cover. And Dani is, Dani and I sort of blend in a certain area. Like, I'm much more into sort of like, I've done a lot of research on like MK Ultra and mind control, and I like synchromysticism and metaphysics and all of this kind of stuff. And Dani's a quantum language coach, and there's a way that all these things are talked about that is sort of interesting. That is where she and I come together. But you and I have a little bit of overlap, and that's it. I can tell that you're interested in a lot of these sort of, you touch into conspiracies and metaphysics. You used to do an astrology show. You kind of have some fun with digging into some of the conspiracies, but you also deeply understand sort of the brainwashing that goes along with some of these political movements and the groups that develop around them. And that's pretty similar to sort of my arc with what I have found in the topics that I'm interested in. So when I'm watching you over all of these years and going, okay, that's a different playground than the one that I'm in, but sort of the same thing is happening to her that happened to me at the playground I play on, that happens to Dani at the playground she plays on, and that as soon as you offer up not it's okay to offer up some resistance to what's happening, but it's not okay to offer up intellectual resistance where you actually have you can see what's going on and you're able to predict what will happen next based on on what you see going on so far. And that is where you get in your case, you get like blacklisted, blackballed, and talked shit about. And in my Dani's case, mostly we just get like sort of pushed to the side and ignored for being, annoying, mouthy Jews or whatever it is, right? But yeah, so that's how I was able to understand it. And just because I think I saw you from the very beginning, I didn't see you sort of once you were already, I mean, I saw you once you were already part of the circuit, but I saw that first entrance and I could tell you had no idea what you had stepped into. And then when you realized what had happened, you didn't just go along because you had 100,000 new best friends. You were just like, no, I'm going to kick and scream all the way and I'm going to take notes and talk about what's happening. And I love it. So
Got me in a lot of trouble at the time, as you saw from everything that happened. But you know what? Listen, I wouldn't have it any other way. I've seen things that I cannot unsee. I've seen how this world really works, and I don't need the biggest thing I've learned is that I don't actually need to be a part of that world to be able to have the impact that I want to have. And I think that that is the thing that scares people a lot of times in terms of speaking up and remaining true to themselves. And I'm not gonna lie, like there have been times when it was really hard. It's really hard to have hit pieces planted on you. It's really hard to have smear campaigns and just massive amounts of defamation hurled at you, and not even just me, but also my friends, my family, everyone that's ever been connected with me. But now that I'm kind of on the other side of it and I've gotten through the storm, I wouldn't change anything because now I'm in a position where I can say whatever I want. I have a completely independent platform. I'm completely independently funded. I am not beholden to anyone. Am I making Dave Rubin type money? No, I'm not, and I probably never will be. But you know what? That's okay because I didn't sell my soul in the process.
yeah, yeah. Can you tell us a little bit, just, this is all like Danny and I have spent a lot of time in the place where like the Rubin report sort of inter was either the portal, like a portal through which the intellectual dark web crept in and started poisoning the minds of people who were beginning to realize something was wrong and sort of drew these artificial boundaries that seemed broad but were really only about an inch wider on the margins than what we had been trapped in before. And you brought up PragerU, and it's funny because when I was telling Dani where I wanted to go with this conversation, I mentioned that. Like I, at this point, I'm trying to kind of understand. I'm not sure if those are people that are just taking Prager and Rubin report. There's others, but just looking at these two right now, like the others seem a little different to me. If these are people who have just found a way to capitalize financially, or if these are somehow corporate or on some level or governmental or military operations that are there to sort of seduce and then compromise sort of in an indirect way people into getting to tell most of the truth, but just leaving out one or two things. Like, do you think, what are your thoughts on it? Is it how intentional is it? And how knowing are the people participating? Or is it just like convenient that something outside of that has figured out how to manipulate that to perform that function?
I guess there's a lot I don't know, and maybe it's because I haven't thought about it long enough to want to know. What I will say is it felt very much in 2020 like I was being recruited into something. Like I've met Ruben in person multiple times. I've been to Dave. I was at Dave Rubin's birthday party. I gave Dennis Prager a giant hug at Dave Rubin's birthday party because he used to talk about me on his radio show all the time. And it's like all of these people are connected with each other. They like the people at Dave Rubin's birthday party was Prager you. And
Yep.
it was just like, and so these people are all very connected, and it felt like I was being brought in as kind of like a tool that they were using for a period of time, and it was made, and at the same time I was also working with the walkaway movement, which was also
Yep.
something that was highly elevated in 2020. And how I experienced it as a complete and total outsider that just kind of got thrown into this mess, was that it was made very clear to me what I could say and what I couldn't say, but it wasn't like they gave me a list of it and said, these are your talking points and you will follow these. But if I ever veered off the reservation during that time period, it was made very clear to me. I was like, you get a little slap on the wrist, or someone says something, or you get a phone call from someone, and you are pushed back onto the track of acceptable thought. And, at that time, this was 2020, and my kind of mindset, I'm an organizational psychologist. I know how to be a team player if I need to be. And my kind of mindset in 2020 was there is a greater good here, and that is making sure Donald Trump gets reelected. And if I need to shut my mouth for a little while and just say the things that are required to say, okay, I can do that for a temporary period of time. And so when all this was happening, I was really kind of holding myself back with what I actually wanted to say, because I was like, be a team player. There's a bigger picture here. And I really do feel, I mean, you brought up like the woo woo and the astrology. I really do feel like this is a spiritually driven path for me. When I got thrown into this world, it was because I wrote an article that I put on medium.com about, being a Democrat who went to a Trump rally. It went massively viral on the internet. Medium has since banned my account, but I do still have the article somewhere. I said that pedophilia was bad and Medium didn't like that, so they banned my account entirely and took down the article and all that stuff. But anyway, like so I got kind of like thrown into this. And what I didn't realize about the whole thing is that it is just like a contrived world that these people have created, where they're just looking for symbols that they can lift up that speak to the narrative at any given time. And it was very funny for me during the Republican 2024 primary in New Hampshire, because I live in New Hampshire, so we were very lucky. We have all the politicians, we have all the politics and all that stuff. But Fox News actually emailed me right before the New Hampshire primary in 2024 to say, Carlin, do you know any more Democrats who have left the left after going to a Trump rally that we can feature on Fox News? And I was like, no, assholes. I'm sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear, but like,
Yeah.
no assholes. I'm not giving you anyone else to suck into your campaign. And so I kind of played their game in 2020, and then in 2021 I started venturing more over to the libertarian side of things. In my heart of hearts, I do actually consider myself to be a libertarian. I consider myself to be an anarcho-capitalist. But the Libertarian Party is also just has its own massive amounts of problems that we don't need to go into today, so we'll spend the entire show talking about the problems. So but bigger picture, when I started kind of like veering away from like MAGA politics or conservative anchor stuff like that, it started to be made very clear to me that I wasn't allowed to do this. And several months later, when I really started getting, because like if you tell me not to do something, it's exactly what I'm gonna do. I'm like, they're like, don't say this, don't say this. I'm like, oh yeah, you don't want me to say it? I'm gonna say it. Not only am I gonna say it, I'm gonna say it every single day, and I'm gonna say it in a tone you really don't like. And so when I started doing that, I really got excommunicated from conservative Inc. And I got hit pieces planted on me by them and all that stuff, because they really will. Like, if you are on the outs, you are on the outs, and there's nothing you can do to get back in. And that's completely fine with me, because I want to be able to tell the truth and say what I think.
I'm curious to know, Carlin, like when you were given your slaps on the wrist, like under what auspices and who was doing the wrist slapping, and what were you saying that was getting their panties in a bunch?
No, honestly, I don't even really remember. I mean, I think it might have been I was talking about I was you know what it was is right after Joe Biden took office in 2021, I started working with like well, they're libertarians in New Hampshire, but like they're technically like Republican politicians, to pass an anti-CRT bill on the state level, because like Trump's executive orders around critical race theory had just gotten rescinded. This was still in the early days of critical race theory, where people didn't really know what it was. And so I was working with these politicians to try to get these bills passed. And in New Hampshire, it was the Republican Party who was sabotaging the bill. It was not the Democrats. It was the Republicans from start to finish. And I started really banging the drum, being like, this is not going to work for reason X, Y, B, and Z. And it's the Republicans that are actually causing all the problems. And that was one of the first big things that was made clear to me. Like, you do not talk about this. Like, and basically the message was, like, you need to let us pass our bills, and you need to let us tell people that we banned critical race theory, and it doesn't really matter if we actually banned it or not. And it's like the people that it's not as though you get a phone call from someone and they're like, hey, stop talking about this. It's just gentle nudges in the direction saying, are you sure about this? Have you thought about this? Have you talked to so and so? And it's like you don't even notice it at first until you start looking back and kind of reverse engineering. Oh, there was a pattern here. And it's like, and it's not like you get a phone call saying like, oh, you've been excommunicated. You just start having hit pieces planted on you everywhere out of nowhere. They're just lying about you to millions of people. So yeah.
Um, So one of the things, so we started, Danny and I like started critiquing the intellectual dark web, almost from its inception. And in the beginning, the critique was mostly, we like a lot of this. There are a few things we don't like. And then now we're to the point of like, even the few things we thought we liked, we were just being suckered based on our sort of insufficient thinking that hadn't been restored yet, whatever, kind of thing. But one of the things I think that we started hearing that term in like 2016, 2017, and I think probably by 2018 in certainly in private conversations, but maybe even on our shows, I had made the observation that it's pretty strange. And we were still mostly in support at this time of the ideas of the intellectual dark web. I made the observation that it's pretty strange that not a single member is either sort of pro-Palestine or anti-Israel or at least critical of Israel at all. And this was before, Dave Rubin had come out as a rabid Zionist or anything like that. It was really, early on in those days. It was before they were sponsored by PragerU. Dave Rubin. It was when he was sponsored by Learn Liberty, which sounds libertarian, but if you trace that back, now that's some Zionist bullshit too. And we just hadn't put together all the pieces of the sort of network octopus yet. But to this day, there has been nobody who was either part of the intellectual dark web or what I call like, tangential to the intellectual dark web that came through the portal, mostly of the Rubin Report and a few other shows that were sort of, proxy to that. Everyone is either rabidly pro-Israel, right? Only moderately critical, maybe critical of Netanyahu or critical of some small portion of what's going on over there, or they just avoid talking about it at all. We have never heard from that entire cast of characters, many of whom have totally beclowned themselves. The only ones who haven't really beclowned themselves are the ones who sort of jumped ship and you never hear about them anymore, like Christina Hoff Sommers or someone like that, right? But everyone else is either part of this push or being quiet about this push to completely reframe what American people think free speech is. What do you think about that?
I think it's absolutely insane, and I want to be very clear. I know I had a spicy tweet go viral at the end of 2020 where I said Hitler went to heaven, and that's what set off a lot of people against me. My point was that God loves everyone unconditionally, no matter how evil they are in life, and that's why Hitler was in heaven. That was the actual point I was making. If people looked at the broader context, but the reason I bring that up is that's one of the things that like they've used to kind of like defame me and smear me over the years. Oh, she thinks Hitler was great. I'm like, no, I never actually said Hitler was great. But the reason I bring that up is like I never cared about Israel. I literally never cared about Israel. I literally never cared about Jewish anything. It made no difference to me at all if someone was Jewish. I didn't really know anything about the politics around Israel because I've never focused on that sort of thing. And so like when October 7th happened, that was a very big wake up call for me. And like immediately upon when it happened, I was like, obviously like, oh, this is terrible. Oh, we're going to get into another war in the Middle East. Oh, great. This is about to suck up all our money. People are going to die unnecessarily for someone else's wars, all this stuff. But I actually wasn't on either side. I was like, I think like most people, I was like, wow, that's actual terrorism and that's really awful. And a lot of people died. And, it doesn't matter if they're Jewish or they're Palestinians. Like that's a tragedy. And then as more and more information started coming out about it, and the thing that kind of like really clued me into like there's something here that's not quite right was the reaction of all the Zionist influencers. And at the same time I had started kind of like quietly following Nick Fuentes, mostly because I was entertained at how outlandish he was. And I was like, me and my like audience, we weren't fully Nick Fuentes fans at that point. We were very skeptical of him and I've been very, very critical of him. I've been, a little antagonistic of him in the past. But we started like following him around to like these Twitter spaces. We were like, oh, Nick Fuentes is going to be totally anti-Semitic now, and this is going to be really entertaining, and we're going to watch it, and he's going to say really hateful things. And then it turns out he didn't. And so it was a weird experience for me because I had this one guy who I had been really hyper critical of for years leading up to that in Nick Fuentes, who had his chance to be his most anti-Semitic self, and he was honestly providing some of the most nuanced commentary of anyone. He wasn't calling for the genocide of the Jews. He wasn't calling for, he was basically saying, we need Gaza to exist because we need the Palestinians to stay there because I don't want them coming here as refugees, here being America. And I was like, you know what? That's actually kind of a reasonable point. And then at the same time, people like Dave Rubin, people like Douglas Murray and Konstantin Kisin and
Oh
all
my
of these
God.
people, like
Yes.
they lost their minds. And like I was watching Dave Rubin just rabidly go after anyone and calling for the censorship of protesters. And then I started hearing, because I talk to a lot of people just behind the scenes that people don't know that I know and I'm connected with and all that stuff. And I heard from no less than three different people that Dave Rubin started calling around trying to get people fired if they weren't pro-Zionist. And I'm like, dude, you literally wrote a book called Don't Burn This Book. Are you kidding me? Are you just like completely throwing out the window everything that you said that you ever stood for? And he did. And that was just like, I was like, oh my God, this is insane. And so that was kind of my big wake up call to the whole thing. And that's when I really started kind of looking into things more and learning more.
And do you think Dave Rubin was strong armed into taking such an intense Zionist position? Or do you think this sort of hypocrisy was always lurking in the background, waiting to be triggered?
I mean, I'll say like I knew Dave Rubin. Like I had gone like I knew Dave Rubin in person. I had had many conversations with him and I had never heard of this rabid support for Israel before. Like he barely even talked about being Jewish. And so when he came up as such a rabid Zionist after October 7th, I was like, this is crazy. And so my kind of perspective on Dave Rubin now is I think that Dave Rubin is a guy that likes his fame and likes his money and likes his nice things, and he is willing to say and do whatever he needs to say and do in order to maintain his fame and his money and his nice things.
Yeah, that's kind of how I see him as well. Like he doesn't strike me as a person who's like done some awful thing like that he could have been blackmailed about. It more strikes me as he got invited into a club and he liked drinking the finer whiskey and he likes a bigger house and whatever. And but what's interesting is we also when he came out with all of these statements that felt like if he had made mild statements, I would have been like, okay, like I'm Jewish by birth. I don't have any connection to the religion or anything like that, right? My dad is from the Brooklyn Jew, kind of thing. I like matzo ball soup and bagels, and that's about as much as I have in common.
I love bagels.
Yeah,
Bagels are the best invention ever.
right. So that's it for me. But I know plenty of Jewish people who are like, there are people, so we tolerate this bullshit, but I don't have a strong opinion or whatever it is. That's what they think. I don't think that. So I would have seen maybe it was possible for him to be one of those people, but how rabid he got caused us on, I think we did it live in a show one time, to go back and actually look at his very early days when he used to be on the Young Turks,
Oh
and
wow.
he was fucking doing it then. So what I think what happened in my head, the way this stuff goes is that his arc to fame started way back then. Somebody realized like we have someone who's going to be willing to play our game, and this is the arc we want him to go on. And so I think we need to have questions about how sincere any of his changes of positions. Like I don't know what his real positions are. I think whatever gives him the most amount of sort of social capital within a group that he feels is the one he wants to be part of at this time. Like that's sort of the role he'll play. He is a comedian. Lots of comedians have acting experience and they're perfectly happy to play a role for fame. And so I think that is probably a better way to look at him. But it became embarrassingly clear when Glenn Greenwald, early on in the Gaza-Israel conflict, like sometime in the second or third week of October or something like that, was questioning why somebody who made their entire career trying to say that we shouldn't be canceled, we shouldn't burn books, we shouldn't censor, right, was applauding the canceling of protests in Europe that were pro-Palestine. And when Glenn Greenwald, who also is sponsored by Rumble and Locals and all of that kind of stuff, reached out to him and said, would you like to come on and debate this? Dave Rubin was too busy. When is Dave Rubin ever too busy for attention? That has never happened. And to this day, he's always been too busy. So he has never appeared on Glenn Greenwald's show, right? And I was like, it was really embarrassing. And we should have taken an earlier hint Like he was on Joe Rogan once and then never invited, or maybe it was twice, never invited back. And he would talk about he doesn't understand why he's not been invited back. Like even Joe Rogan could see through, who also has a path marked with lots of question marks, right? Could see that this person is just a fucking grifter, right? This person is just like doing whatever the current thing is and pretending it's the opposite of the current thing because that's what's cool in the group he's aspiring to at that time. And yeah, so I mean, I think it was shocking to see him go that hard in the paint, right? And maybe it was just like he was charged with compromising all of these people he had had on their show. When I say compromising, I don't mean getting sexual blackmail on them, although probably some of that that could have happened, right? But getting them to enticing them into this lifestyle enough that they're going to be willing to just leave out the one thing that they don't want to have talked about or whatever it is. And that was what the whole purpose of his time in Los Angeles was to do that so that by the time he moved to the little Israel of Florida, that task would be done and he could live out his days in the sunshine, just doing his show, whatever he wanted. And when he hadn't whipped everybody hard enough with that, when October 7th came, they're like, you better get on the phone and get everybody in line. Right? Otherwise, it's going to be costs.
Yeah. I mean, I think that makes a ton of sense to me. I've thought a lot about this and I've tried to reverse engineer everything that happened to me when I got pulled into this world. And one of the reasons I really think that they lifted me up and kind of like made me this symbol is I think that they thought that I would be much easier to control than I actually turned out to be, because I think a lot of people just go along with it. And I think that they looked at me and they kind of saw, oh, this woman and she doesn't know anything about any of this stuff. And we can probably just tell her what to do. And they had no idea what they were stepping into with me the minute they tried to tell me to do something I didn't want to do, I'll tell you that. But I think that is the type of person that they look for. And I think it's very easy listen, you can make a metric ton of money just by going along with the plan. You can make a metric ton of money by only tweeting the very like lukewarm milquetoast, like talking points, like that you can look at the influencers and see who's following the script and who's not, because they never say a word out of line. Nothing they say is controversial. It's just all the same old stuff that the base wants to hear. It's going to get them really riled up and they're going to go into the replies and feel morally superior to everyone else. And I think that people who ask questions and go outside the approved narrative do not do well in that system at all.
What's your take on someone like Candace Owens? Like, are they giving her a longer leash as far as like a bigger play? What is going on there?
I think Candace has been completely excommunicated. And I think that makes sense, right? Because you look at Candace, I mean, Candace had a whole leaving the left arc as well. And I don't actually think that was fake. I think that was actually real because, at least this is from my perspective. Like, I think, I did go through a several years long process of really changing my mind about a lot of things that I thought were true when I was on the left. And I think that many of the people who come out and quote unquote left the left, I can kind of look at them on sight and go, no, you're fake. You're totally fake. Like, I saw this post on Twitter the other day of like this woman talking about the libs this and the libs that, and she was a lib and she left the left. I was like, let me tell you what, I was a Democrat for 20 years. Leftists do not call liberals libs. Right. That is a conservative thing. So you're fake, and it's very easy to see it. But on the flip side, I think that real recognizes real, and I think Candace's arc is more or less true. And I think at some point, Candace is a very fiery woman, and she got tired of being told what she was and was not allowed to say and what she was not allowed to talk about. And then she gave the finger to everyone and just burned it down. And she was in a position where she's married to a British aristocrat that has more money than God. She can say and do whatever she wants. And so I personally don't like Candace Owens. I think Candace Owens is a narcissist. I wouldn't trust her as far as I could throw her. I've heard many things from behind the scenes that make me question it. But I will say this, I have to give Candace a lot of credit. And I think that the content that she's putting out lately is really good and really high quality. And, kudos to her, because they're going to come after her with all guns blazing. They already are.
Word. We've been following Candace back when she was Red Pill Black on YouTube, and it's been a really fascinating arc. I think, and I love, Emily just sent me this morning her interview with Theo Vaughn, and of course, we love anyone who's willing to speak truth to fake power. But given how many strikes we've gotten, you know, how many accounts we've had taken down, it to me it just seems suspect that YouTube lets her fly, Twitter lets her fly, that like nothing gets deleted with her when I understand how controlled this space is. But then again, maybe she's just making so much money for big tech that that's the exception. I don't really get it because we've never really been allowed into that space.
I think that I mean, people say that about my YouTube channel though. James Lindsay likes to tell people that I'm a fed because YouTube won't ban my YouTube channel because I watch his content on it. And so I don't know. I don't know the inner workings of YouTube. I know my channel has been shadow banned on YouTube since I got excommunicated from the right in 2020 actually. And it was very stark the minute it happened. My numbers just just completely plummeted. But that's okay. I still make enough to get by. But I think with Candace, I think she's very high profile. I think it would be it's much easier to go after lower profile people than it is to go after someone like her because she's just gonna raise an army of holy hell.
I think with Candace, like there's a couple of things going on there, right? I agree with you. I do think her arc is at least mostly genuine, right? But sometimes we can get confused because someone's art can be genuine, but because part of their nature is they're also very good at like capitalism or promoting themselves or making the kind of stir that you can like turn into a lot of eyeballs on you, that means that their arc is not real. And I think she's just a master at being able, she's kind of like Madonna that way, being able to take controversy and turn it into something that gets more eyeballs on her, right? That type of thing, and sort of recreate herself from having left the left to a conservative Catholic woman to Brigitte Macron as a man, right? She can just kind of keep rebranding herself, but she does it with this sort of confidence and flair that people just keep watching, whether they agree or disagree. As many people love to hate her as they love to love her, right? Or so the other thing, you said something that I just want to touch on sort of before we move on, because I see a lot of this now, right? You see a lot of people who are sort of MAGA or MAGA adjacent, or people who are some type of libertarian. There's an argument about what libertarianism, actually is. I think for the most part, Dani and I are with you. We're sort of, voluntarist or whatever in nature, maybe more voluntarist for me than anarcho-capitalist or libertarian or whatever it is. But, a lot of these people are like, well, is this topic of the Israel-Gaza war or the speech issues connected to it, is that the hill you want to die on? Like, this is America, this is not Israel, blah, 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 right? So it's like, they're like, I hear your point, but like, if everything else is good, like, let's just go with that. And to me, there's like a couple of problems with that, right? A, like, it's intellectually lazy. But B, like there's never been anything that our government has tried on or allowed to go on for other people that they haven't then brought home and implemented on some, though oftentimes like a more disguised level here. And especially as we're at this like brink of like, AI and algorithmic warfare and like all kinds of surveillance capitalism and whatnot. And you have the rise of people like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and David Sachs, who are all like literally genetically related to people who started technocracy and who have a different understanding of like eugenics and how that might be deployed than most people understand or are comfortable with. That we not only is it a lazy argument, but it could be like a fatal argument for people to make that Faustian bargain of like, we're going to let that one go. But you see this all the time. And I'm sure that like, because you've been in some of those more high profile political circles, you've seen even a lot more of it and much more in person. When you talk to some of these people, like, how do they defend that? Is it just the same stupid tweets that they give us online? Or do they have a more nuanced argument? when
You
it
know,
comes.
I think I haven't I'm gonna be honest. I really these days I kind of try to keep to myself. I've been off on my like ever since the end of 2022. 2022 was the worst year of my life. They defamed me so much. It was awful. I kind of went off into my own little bubble and I'm like, I'm gonna go over here on the internet and I'm gonna talk about communism and socialism and you guys can dick around with whatever you want to and I'll be over here and anyone who wants to come over here can join me. And I kind of just I don't even do a lot of shows like this anymore because I find that most people are just like they're just out to be famous. They'll say whatever they want to say to be. They don't actually have any interest in the topics that I have interest in. And so, to be honest, like especially since October 7th, I haven't really had many of those conversations. Because it's kind of like I know I'm not going to get anything. I know what the
Right.
priority of a lot of these people are. It is simply to be relevant and to be retweeted on Twitter and to make money doing what they want to do. And you know what? If that's what you want, more power to you. And I'm not going to waste any of my energy trying to explain to you why, when you invited me into the Big Tent in 2020, because you told me that the Republican Party was the protector of individual liberties and free speech that the Democrats were trying to take away, I actually took you seriously back then when you said that. And now I go on Twitter today and I see all sorts of Republicans and MAGA people saying, you know, the Big Tent was a horrible idea and we never should have done this and we should be gatekeeping all these people out. And it's like, you people have no sense of history. You have no self awareness of what you're doing. And this backfired colossally for the left. And it's going to backfire for the right too. And the thing of it is because I track the far left so much, I know how massively the left is still winning when it comes to culture. Like the right doesn't
Mhm.
understand this, but the left is still winning massively. And so when the right is playing around with these games where they're just trying to divide people, they're gatekeeping people out that could otherwise be voices to try to wake people up from the left. My biggest thing and why I speak out about this so strongly is that I believe that the right, the conservatives, the GOP, the MAGA people, conservative Inc., whatever you want to call it, the Zionists especially, they are very literally running cover for the far left. The far left can say and do whatever they want. They're protesting in the streets. The right doesn't even know that they're not Democrats. They don't even know what groups these people are part of because they're more interested in attacking people who are not bending the knee to Israel on their own side than they are in actually understanding and defeating the left. And so for me,
Mhm.
that's a big problem. And that's kind of like where I like to focus.
And what has you saying that the left is winning the culture war?
They own everything. They own everything. They own the public schools. They own the universities. They own media. They own entertainment. They own and the thing of it is they've already brainwashed an entire generation of kids. I mean, several generations at this point. And the reality is that you cannot get out of what's been done with an executive order or two executive orders or 100 executive orders. Trump can issue as many executive orders as he wants. And generally speaking, I think that his executive orders are more good than they're bad, but people are being extremely unrealistic about whether or not they're going to solve this problem. Dismantling the Department of Education is not going to solve this problem. It's actually going to make the problem worse because now there are going to be schools. We're seeing this actually in the state of Vermont. The state of Vermont, they want schools to become sanctuary schools, which basically means rejecting all federal funding and then doing whatever they want. And it's like Vermont schools get about like 14% on average of their budget from federal funding. So it would be a hit, but not like an insurmountable hit. And so it's like these are the things that keep me up at night where I go into the meetings where the far left talks about this stuff. I record them. I try to get them out there so other people can see it. And so I know exactly what they're doing and the Republicans have no idea because they're more busy fighting with each other than they are in paying attention to what's going on.
Do you see a solution, like given that we do have multiple generations now indoctrinated into this like Maoist Marxist wokeism, like do you see a way out of this?
I mean, that's what I spend my time doing. I spend my time teaching people about what the left is doing. And I think that the way that we get out of this is people need to start hinging back into reality with what the left is, what they believe, how they articulate those values, the language that they use, because the language they use is, it sounds like English, but it's not. It's a completely different language that they've developed. It's a completely different dialect. And so I think that the first thing that needs to happen is that people need to learn the language the left is using to be able to identify when this stuff is happening around them because I accidentally became fluent in the language of socialist. I call it socialist and just colloquially. And I became fluent in it because about 4 years ago, I started watching DEI trainings on my channel and then slowly started going from DEI trainings to the more radical revolutionary socialist and communist stuff. And over the course of just I've watched thousands of hours of this stuff almost every single day for years. I became fluent in their language. And the minute I became fluent in their language, I started seeing things pop up around me that I had
Yep.
no idea was
Yep.
happening happening before. And to me, it is the biggest antidote and the biggest inoculation to what the left is doing, because you can see through every single message and you see how pervasive it is and you see how many people are involved. And I'll tell you what, all of this woke, the quote unquote woke right stuff that's going on with with like the James Lindsays and the Constantine Kissins, the Colin Wrights, all these like shills on the right, it is playing into what the left wants so desperately.
Mhm.
It's a complete and total distraction from what they're doing.
So I used to tune in once in a while to your Socialism Saturdays, and
Oh yeah.
that it was fascinating to listen to you sort of go into this, and I could see exactly what you're talking about. Like even, my most of my interests lie someplace different than that, but because of a few crossovers, I will tune in even to people who like I like some of the things they say, right? Like do dissidents or savvy sabs or whatever it is, and we may agree in some of their analysis of things, but they will begin to use the language that you're talking about when they're talking about what they think the solution. There's certain terms there that you hear that I recognize from having grown up in a fairly far left family in Los Angeles.
What terms? I'm
Well,
curious.
there's always a lot of specific, like, it's almost like, when you start to recognize like similar architecture that makes you describe a house as like Mediterranean or mid-century modern or Victorian or whatever. There's certain crafting of words around things having to do with like organizing and resisting. There's like a whole sort of like set of words that they use whenever they're talking about those topics that make me feel the same way as like I'm sure you've tapped in because you've been part of the Libertarian Party to the whole difference between like English and legalese, and the fact that like when our government became more corporate, they started using these legalese terms that sound like English but have a completely different definition. And if people don't understand which jurisdiction that they're operating in, they get tricked into agreeing to something that means something different. That's like what it's what when I would listen to you talk about what you would learn at these meetings, it seems like almost that, because a lot of what also goes on in these meetings is people like consenting and agreeing or gaining consensus amongst the group. And so they're agreeing to words that sound like English. And unless they're very, very studied on that topic, they're actually agreeing to something that they might not if they knew what it meant. And by the time they ever figure it out, they're so brainwashed that they now sort of agree or whatever. If you can even agree when you're brainwashed. So I always found that interesting to listen to you. I would love maybe sometime to have you back to do like a segment on your experience in the Libertarian Party, and then a segment on socialism, communism, Marxism, and what even the people on the left who think that they understand it get wrong about that, right? So I would love to do that, but I want to, so we didn't completely bury the lead, spend the next 15 minutes talking about the importance of people understanding why anti-Semitic speech is free speech. Why like, if America is a country that is built on, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and whatever it is, and number one is the freedom of speech. It's not number two, it's not number five, it's number one. Why this is the moment, and why if there were a hill to die on, everybody has to start defending even speech that they abhor, not the content of it, but the ability of it to be expressed. So Dani and I have spoken endlessly about this, but I would like to hear your sort of rant from all the things you've learned about this.
Yeah, I'll start off by saying is like, what does anti-Semitic even mean? Because like, I personally don't care if people are Jewish. Obviously, like you're like, I don't care if people are Jewish. It makes no difference to me. But what I'm being told is I have to support every single thing that Israel does, and I firmly do believe that Israel is trying to genocide the Palestinians. I think this was always about taking that land and making it a part of Israel and getting them off the land so that they could have it for themselves. And I don't feel like saying that should be considered anti-Semitism, but I've been told over and over and over again, I'm anti-Semitic if I don't support Israel. Well, why? Israel is a foreign power. Israel is not America. And the voices that I'm being told this the loudest are the voices that just a couple years ago were standing up against tech censorship and free speech censorship, and now they're very literally calling for people to be censored and banned. And so the first thing we need to do is do what I always do, is just start off with a definition. What does anti-Semitism even mean? If we're talking about anti-Semitism and people going around saying all Jews should die just for being Jewish, Okay, I can agree that that is bad and wrong and not something that I would ever support. But if we're talking about anti-Semitism, meaning you don't support the Zionist exercise that is Israel, that is a very different discussion because that is about a foreign power taking precedence over what is in the well-being of Americans, and I can't co-sign that, and I should be able to say that, and you should be able to say that, and anyone should be able to say that. And I watch the campus protests. I don't watch the coverage of them. I watch the actual videos that are taken on the ground at the college encampments. I just go and watch the primary source footage of these people protesting in the streets. They're not calling for the death of Jews. They're not pro Hamas. And so when I see these talking points echoed in conservative media, like they're pro Hamas Jew haters, where? Where? Because I watched hours and hours and hours of this stuff over the past year. I don't see them talking about pro Hamas, pro Jewish, or excuse me, anti Jewish anything. In fact, I've seen the opposite. There are Jewish students involved in these protests, and one of the students that just got expelled from Columbia a couple days ago, his name is Grant Minor. Grant Minor was the head of the student union. He was involved in the encampments. He's Jewish, and they expelled him for being a Jew hating anti Semite. And it's just like, I'm not on the side of the campus protesters. These are radical revolutionary socialists. I'm not on their team. I don't support their cause necessarily, but you cannot tell me that this is anti-Semitism. And so I think the big lie that's being told is what it means to be an anti-Semite and how people are positioning the censorship that they're trying to exert onto other people in the form of like stopping hate or being the righteous party, and it's just not the truth. I don't see any evidence that these people hate Jews in any way, shape, or form. I don't well There are real anti-Semites out there, but most of the people talking about these issues that people are calling for to be banned are simply inconvenient to the cause of Israel, nothing more.
1,000%. And I'll also say, as a Jew who gets attacked frequently for being a Jew on BitChute, I will fight to the death for someone's right to call me a stupid gap-toothed kike. Like, I want to know who thinks that so I can know who to steer clear of. But they've clearly put a lot of money and effort into creating this like fictional, inextricable binding between the state of Israel, the politics of Israel, and Jewish people, which for me as a Jewish woman, I find that whole thing completely offensive. And it's obviously set up to gatekeep any criticism of our involvement in Israeli politics. And the fact that, like, I mean, I first got my panties in a bunch about this back after Hurricane Katrina, when I found out that people weren't allowed to get their FEMA payouts if they had been on the record critical of Israel. And I'm like, what? Why is that even possible? So when you're talking to, conservatives or people who are holding this strong Zionist stance, is there any self-awareness around how ridiculous it is that we're silencing Americans in America for what's happening in this other country?
No, there's no self-awareness at all. And that's one of the most frustrating things. Like, I wrote a book back in 2021 called Actively Unwoke, The Ultimate Guide for Fighting Back Against Woke Insanity in Your Life. Literally, the introduction to that book says over and over and over again, you are not a racist. You are not a racist. You are not a racist. They're trying to convince you that you're a racist. You're not a racist. And so when I look at what's going on with the anti-Semitism stuff now, I kind of want to like slap in their faces and go, you are not an anti-Semite. Stop buying into this contrived narrative, because it is literally rehashing the left's playbook from 2016 to 2020 and trying to convince everyone that they were racist. The right is now doing exactly the same thing, trying to convince everyone that if they don't say the right words and do the right things and post the Israeli flag in their profile, then you are literally an anti-Semite. And I'm like, they have no self-awareness that they're doing exactly the same thing. And it's honestly pretty shocking to watch. And I don't even try to engage in conversation with them anymore, to be honest. When I see someone like parroting those talking points or coming into my feed saying things that are just overtly untrue, I block and I move on, because these are not people that can be reasoned with.
Yeah, Dani and I, we have the fortune of being called anti-Semites despite the fact that we're both Jewish, but then also being untrustworthy because we're Jewish, that we may be posing as being right. Like we get the whole like, a person can't just like with their own intellect and their own sense of ethics and morality decide what they're cool with and what they're not. And then it always has to be traced back to some further whatever it is, right? So okay, so First, what I often find, I was listening to this really interesting video the other day that brought up something that I always notice. The video was titled, it was from a month ago, but somehow I never saw it till the other day. These two right here. Part one was called Revealed NATO Targets Its Own Population with Cognitive Warfare. And then this one, NATO's Plans to Sacrifice. I haven't listened to this one yet, but I just clicked on it so I wouldn't forget to go back to it. But I listened to all of this. And one of the things that was brought up in this, it was actually really good, really a really good summary, was how always within the propaganda that they're selling you, there is two ideas that go against one another. They don't make sense. There's like this thing that should stand out is, wait, how can this be true within this other thing you're telling me is true? But for some reason, getting you to accept that, like, no, sometimes things just don't make sense, and that's okay. You should accept that as like part of the thing. And like literally, like the Palestinians are Semites, right? So like, what the fuck are we even actually talking about, right? And a good portion of Jews are not Semites. A good portion of Jews are Eastern European people who have no tie to that land other than that they moved there at some point, on somebody else's dime or something like that, right? So there's that sort of, cognitive dissonant type idea embedded in that. I was watching when you were talking about how wrong people are about what's going on at the protests, and you were like, everyone just easily goes, oh, it's like George Soros is funding them, and you're like, no, it's this like revolutionary communist. And there was like one woman, I ended up going and looking her up and researching her a little. I can't remember what her name is right now, but if you said it, I'd be like, yes, that's the one. Like one woman who's been involved in this stuff forever and ever and ever. I can't remember what her name is.
Angela Davis.
No, 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 the other one. I don't think it was Angela Davis. It was like someone who just does this, helps people with protests. Um,
I'd have to
you
have
say
that.
lots of people's names.
Yeah.
Yes, it wasn't her though, but it was someone who like she'd come up before, like around Occupy Wall Street. Like her name had been brought up before as like someone who was part of the underlying chaos creation of that and whatever it is, right? But yeah, I agree with you. Like people they get into these polarized opinions about the protests or whatever it is, and on both sides the viewpoint is incorrect. Like it's not like the two things oppose each other, but the people who think they're good are not seeing what's really going on some levels, and the people who think they're bad are not really seeing what it's about, right? And so the whole thing is like many layers thick. But I agree with you. I mean, I think some of the most sort of ardent protesters are Jewish themselves, like you were saying, like the gentleman at Columbia. And also, like, I haven't, whenever I say I've never heard anyone like be pro Hamas. So one of my listeners did respond and say, actually, Nick from Revolutionary Blackout Network has said that he's pro Hamas. So I stood corrected. There is someone out there who's like pro Hamas or whatever, right? But yeah, it's a complete misunderstanding on both sides of what the protests actually are and what the social dynamics are that are at play there. So I think all that stuff that you just said was really interesting. What do we're involved in Israeli politics, but obviously they're involved in our politics in a way that I don't think it's okay for anyone's government to be involved in another government's politics. But in this case, we're literally talking about this like little tiny country basically squeezing the ball sack of this country into the like most contorted, distorted, nonsensical positions, period. Do you have like I because I agree with most of what you've already said about people not understanding that who's really still in charge and this, that, and the other thing. I don't know that I have a lot of hope for being able to sort of make a shift in this. Like, where do you think we go from here?
I
Right?
mean, well, maybe I'll give you a little bit of hope that I think that our perspective is winning. I think that the reason that we see so much pushback on this issue from the Zionist like agenda is because we are actually winning. I mean, again,
Okay.
I'll bring up like Nick Fuentes. Like Nick Fuentes is incredibly relevant. Like they go after him all the time. He's one of the least hateful people that you watch. He'll make spicy jokes here and there. Okay, fine. He's a young guy. He's gonna do that sort of stuff. But like if people actually listen to him, like he's not being hateful. He's not doing
It's
anything
very polite. Yeah.
very polite. He's more, and
Yeah.
he's more relevant than ever. It's like 500,000 Twitter followers. He was banned on Twitter, a year ago or so. And you see like all of this pushback. A lot of the pushback that's coming on Twitter is literally because of the groypers. It's because the groypers and all their friends are in everyone's reply every time one of these Zionist shills says anything, and they get a metric ton of replies basically pushing back on what they're saying. And so I think that, one of the reasons they're trying to push this anti-Semitism line, oh my God, the increased anti-Semitism. There's
Ah,
like, are the anti-Semites in the room with you right now? Because I mean, if you actually look at what's going on, it's people calling them out on their bullshit lies. And that's what's actually going on. And they're calling it anti-Semitism because it's a way that you can get people to silence themselves. And so I think right now we are in a war where the establishment does not want people to see what's really going on. And we're kind of like, I mean, I hate to say like the freedom fighters on the other side saying, no, we're going to say whatever we want to say and you can't stop us now. And I think there are enough of us that this message is going to break through, and that's part of why they're so afraid. And listen, I mean, it's an uncomfortable thing for people to grapple with. No one wants to be accused of being hateful towards other people. No one wants to be accused of being an anti-Semite. We may have all gotten used to being called a racist, but like no one actually does want to be called a racist, right? But I think that part of the reason that we see spicy posts from people is the rebellion against this idea that we shouldn't be allowed to say these words. Like these are words, we should actually be allowed to say them. And then, sometimes we might say a little bit of a spicier thing that can get taken and twisted out of context to say, oh, like there's so many times like people have said, oh, Carlin really loves Hitler because I had people post pictures of Hitler in my timeline one day because I actually do like historical photos. I think they're interesting. But I think that, we are winning. And the fact that this is even a matter of major discussion right now is reflective of we're winning. And I think that what I can't wait to see is I really do think Elon Musk is going to wake up someday to all of this.
oh.
Like when I look at Elon Musk's arc, Elon Musk is following a very similar arc to the arc that I followed, which is like you wake up to that the left is bullshit and kind of crazy, and then you kind of like get into the conservative right ecosystem. And listen, when you don't know better and when you're in that ecosystem, it actually feels really good. It feels like you're amongst friends. You don't feel like you're surrounded by a bunch of frauds. And I'm sure that Elon has had the red carpet rolled out for him. Everyone's treating him very nice. And so he is in the conservative establishment ecosystem. But I think we've seen a few glimmers where Elon Musk has said something that is outside of that ecosystem, and he's already experienced the blowback of what happens when he does that, and that's going to start to happen more and more and more. And I think people need to understand that waking up and going through the process of cognitive dissonance is a years long process for a lot of people. It's not something that happens overnight or in a couple months. A lot of people think that I just went to a Trump rally and left the left. That's not what happened. um, but I think that he is going to wake up some point to the amount of influence that Israel has, and oh, watch what happens when they try to silence him then, because better or worse, he is the richest man in the world. He can do whatever he wants. There's nothing they can really do to him. And so I think that that's the moment that I'm waiting for. When he really understands how powerful the Israel lobby is, that's when the tide starts to turn again.
Interesting. All right. So I will I think probably I'm just gonna guess for Dani. My own instinct is that I don't know about Elon Musk. I don't trust him either, but I'm recording that you have said that because you have been right about a lot of things. And so if and when that happens, I'll be like, we heard it first from 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 Carlin here. Dani, do you have any last question before we wrap it up and let her go?
Colin, I want to be respectful of your time and thank you so much for coming on the show. And I honestly think everything you just said is a great way to end our segment. I'm definitely looking forward to our next conversation, and thanks again for coming on.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. I had a ton of fun, and I would love to continue the conversation. I wish I had more time today, but I do have to go, but definitely would continue it another time.
We'd love to have you back to talk about libertarianism and then your chosen topics of research into the depths of socialism, Marxism, communism. So we will reach out to you and get that one on the books. Let people know where they can find you and how they can support you if they like what they heard here today.
Yeah, you can find me on my Substack. That is Carlin, KARLYN.substack.com. That's the best place to access my writing and a lot of my archives. I have a massive amount of archives on that Substack, so you'll learn a lot about the left there. I also am on Twitter. I am Dr. Carlin B on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it. And you can also find me on YouTube and Rumble. I stream 6 days a week, Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Socialism Saturday on Saturdays at 6 p.m. And I have books out. I have 2 new books out. I've got The Brief History of Racism, which actually goes back to the invention of the word racism, and it tracks the definition of it and how it's evolved. And anti-Semitism was invented as a word to mean racism against Jewish people. It is the only group that has their own special word for racism. I will let you take from that what you will. And then we have my new book. It's called Debunking the Communist Manifesto. Ignore this gray line. This is a proofing copy, but I literally went through and wrote a 400-page book debunking every aspect of the Communist Manifesto, and that is out now, and you can find those books on Amazon.
I love it, and I request that you guys do a show about that first book she showed, because Dani is a quantum language coach, and you're talking about the word racism. So I request that all of us would like to show her your book, Dani. There you go.
Oh, great, because see, we are the minimalist covers, the minimalist book covers.
I know, and like super similar palette as well. Awesome. Yeah, we could do a book trade.
I demand for the public that you guys do that. And until then, Carlin, thank you so much for your time. We will be in touch, and I really enjoyed it and appreciated meeting you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys, for having me. Appreciate it. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks,
have a wonderful
Carlin.
day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And there she goes. Wow, I really liked her.
She was awesome.
We hope you just enjoyed a very special gift to all of you from our Words Podcast Locals community. That was part of episode 101, but we decided the interview with Carlin was so awesome that we wanted to share it with all of you. Dani, what did you think?
Yeah, it was super fun to get to drop in with her. She's not our normal guest. I don't think she's as sort of like cosmically, conspiratorially out there as we are, but I just loved getting to drop in with a badass babe who's not willing to be silenced, who's not willing to toe the party line, who's not willing to not ask the questions that she wants to ask. So I loved having her on the show.
I can't wait till she has questions to ask about Elon. How about that?
Word.
Yeah. All right. If you guys enjoyed this interview and you want to hear Dani and I's post-show thoughts about that and some arguments about other stuff, wordspodcast.locals.com, promo code welcome to words, all one word in capital. We'll see you at Word Salad on Wednesday. Bye.
Bye.